So let me start by asking you to present the current landscape in Tunisia.
Yes. Well, as you said, this was also a bit what I said in my policy brief. I published a policy brief in July that was actually presenting some of these challenges. So when I wrote that policy brief, the situation was that after the 2011 and successive reforms and constitutional agreements to the Constitutional Assembly, the Tunisian parties made an agreement to make constitutions through different different parts of society were involved, and that led to a constitution that led also then to elections in 2014 for both the government and the President of the Republic. That was a significant change for the country after the revolution, and a significant institutional moment to try to consolidate the transition that has been going on since 2011. Now the outlook is more or less the same, with the same problematics, but we have a new government since August. There has been a change in the government landscape after trust vote on the SID government. There is a new prime minister with a reshuffled government with the same parties that were elected in 2014. That is the Youssef Chahed. But some of the problems remain the same, which are, first of all, we have a coalition, a union government that involves different parties with different connotations, and mainly we have Nida Tounes, which is the party of the Prime Minister and the President, that is a secularist party, and it is also more or less moderate conservative, and with them there is a Nahda, which is the party of the Islamist party that has been involved into politics after the transition, and these are the two, let's say, main forces inside. Then we have some other parties, but mainly we have these two. And talking about to like summarize a bit which are the main issues related to the political landscape. The issues that being Nahda an Islamist party, and being Nida Tounes a party that is mainly secularist, and in which remain some elements of the party of Ben Ali. There is a sort of a struggle within the party itself, Nida Tounes, to cooperate or not with Nahda. So that is one, let's say, challenge in the political landscape, which has created some changes within Nida Tounes itself, and continues to create some problems. And also there are some issues related to reform, because being the connotation of the party is quite different and their views over how to reform the country, there are it blocks reform in some files. For instance, the electoral law for the municipalities and the decentralization code are hindered by some, let's say, the intergovernment coalition issues. So that is, in terms of political landscape, I think these are the things to point out most. And of course, also there is an issue of, let's say, trust of a part of the people who were involved in the revolution towards a government that has some components that some of them recall as being part of the previous regime, which in some way I think it's good that the transition of Tunisia has been smooth, has not led to a total let's say change in every issue. Also, some parts of the military are the same, some parts of the intelligence and the police, but that is not forcefully a bad thing. But for sure, in the long run, it will need it will be needed to enforce a way to more transparency and ensure that democratic processes are enforced in every part. I hope this was not too confused,
no problem. I mean,
but it's a very broad and complex landscape, political landscape, and but I think these are the main issues. And just to say a few words about the new government. This new government. This Youssef Chahed, the Prime Minister of Tunisia, he's quite young. There are some, let's say, problems, not problems, but there are some contestants saying that he's too related to the President of the Republic, and also the fact that both are part of the same party. Well, it's the main party, so, but there is some worries related to that, but in reality he has presented some ideas to reform the country, and he has criticized the previous government for not taking enough action, and he's very active on two main subjects, let's say, terrorism and like the security issues, and corruption, which we'll see how it will go. And but it seems at least that this compromise that is taking place with the different parts, and mainly between the Ennahda and Nida Tunis, seems to be working. But for sure there was a very interesting article a few months ago or last year from Nadia Marzouki, who's a scholar that she's Tunisian, and she talked about this rotten compromise between the parties, in the sense that yes, there is compromise, but it's difficult to make it work, let's say.
I see. Well, you already jumped on the second question.
Yes.
It was about internal and external challenges that Tunisia faces in order to reform. And I would like to keep right now the external part, the external threats, because in your policy brief that you published during summer, during July, if I'm not mistaken, you examined or presented the key challenges that hinder the process of reform. Some of them, you tackled on them during the first question. So could you please refer to the main external challenges that Tunisia faces? Or some of them, like when it comes to security, can be also domestic.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Indeed, the situation in Libya has an impact on Tunisia, but that is also related to the internal situation in Tunisia, in a sense that, in Tunisia you have some regions that are bordering with Libya and with Algeria, and that have a socioeconomic situation that is very much, let's say, underdeveloped compared to the regions facing the sea, because of historical issues, because of historical reasons, because they have always been somehow, the Tunisian state has always been quite centralized, and they have always been left a bit behind. And also there is the issue of the reform of the decentralization, decentralization of the country that should fix this is dealt with. Then the economic issue, of course, will need even more effort. But because also of this centralization of the state and the situation of the decentralized, let's say the bordering regions, there is a to criminal activity, mainly because we always hear about terrorist groups, but many of them are not only terrorist groups or are not terrorist groups. Like, there are very different types of groups within Tunisia and in the countries like in Libya and in Algeria. We have let's say terrorist groups that are also smugglers that also control parts of borders, and with which the army has constant problems. And that is a problem that is indeed related also to the situation in Libya. So it's easier because on the other side of the border there is no control, there is no law enforcement, but that also creates a problem within Tunisia itself. However, it's an internal problem as well. There is clearly a problem with some groups. We've seen in the past year there have been some clashes. There has been a main attack on the city of Benguerdan, which is a city that is on the border and is particularly fragile in respect of these groups. But for the moment, let's say Tunisia has managed not to get too much. Let's say to be affected too much by this military activity, paramilitary activity or criminal activity. But it's clear that if the situation in Libya is not solved in the medium long term, that will pose threats to the situation in Tunisia. And of course, also if socioeconomic problems keep to have part of the population in a subaltern way. No, not subaltern. That's Italian. But if they are kept, let's say, in a status that is very much lower than what the central part of Tunisia is, and also if the state doesn't manage to let's say control these regions, that will be a problem also on the security side. But I think there is pretty much an economic problem that is the main problem, which is also related to a lot of young people that are not
they are not integrated probably economically.
And they are not employed. There is a very high level of unemployment, and in these regions. And Tunisia has been, in the past couple of years, the main living country for foreign fighters, for Daesh in Syria and Iraq. So there is a part of this youth that is sensible and could probably join these criminal groups, making them bigger and yeah.
So the ground is quite fertile among young people in Tunisia.
Yes.
I mean, for recruiters from ISIS,
yes.
organizations to recruit them.
Yes. I'm not saying that the only reason why people join Daesh is poverty or socioeconomic problem, but it
plays an important role.
It plays an important role, especially in that.
And maybe this is exactly an area where the international donors and the EU should focus and work more actively. And in that sense, I mean, the situation seems quite complex to me, like both within Tunisia and at the same time in the neighboring countries. So I understand why the term fragile is used quite often when they refer to Tunisia and democracy. What I would like to know when it comes to the socioeconomic conditions is international donors and mainly the EU. What are they doing right now in order to improve the situation? And I would like to refer to two specific cases. The DCFTA, which is like the trade component of partnership between EU and a country from the European Neighbourhood Policy, and the visa facilitation, which is something more concrete, as I say, as we saw also in the case of Moldova in the Eastern Partnership, and something that probably we'll see in the case of Ukraine and Georgia later on. Yeah. So what is the current status?
Well, you mentioned two things that are very important, but I would like also to mention that in the end of September there has been also joint communication on the scope of cooperation with the country. Let's say the EU has proposed a series of fields in which it wants to cooperate with Tunisia more in order to enhance its probabilities to be and overall process and. Of course, in this joint communication, it's also mentioned visa facilitation, which I think it's a very important, let's say, carrot for Tunisia that has been. So recently, there was it has been released that it's going to be soon put in place a system of visa facilitation, but it's still being negotiated with Tunisia, but it enhances the mobility partnership that was already approved a few years ago. And that is a very important, I also said it, I think, in my policy brief, that I think that is the kind of positive incentives that the EU should put in place towards countries like Tunisia, where that could really help their economic growth, jobs and growth system, and also to better integrate it within our, let's say, market, in our jobs market, in our the overall European system. And in this sense, also this DCFTA that is being negotiated. There was the first round of negotiation in April, where the EU made a proposal, and where the two parties agreed on some principles to put in place the DCFTA. Same time, it has not yet come back to a more specific, let's say, another round where the Tunisian got back to the EU with their views on
the
recommendations. Yeah, because I think this first round was more a proposal. They started with the process, and I mean the principles are very important, like progressive opening of the market and regulatory issues, and the principle that the two markets are indeed very different. So we have the EU is an economic power. Even if we had a crisis, we still are a huge economic power, and Tunisia is a small market with all its fragilities, and also related to the question before, security issues have really had a very negative effect on tourism, which was one of the main sectors in Tunisia, at least in the sea, in the coastal areas. So that Tunisia really needs help at economic level.
Yes. At the same time, I just wanted to ask you something like as a follow-up to what you were saying about DCFTA. There is quite big skepticism, let's say, within the country, within the population, about the benefits of the DCFTA. So, what's the current what's the feeling from the population?
They are scared that would kill many of the smaller local businesses. And there is this risk. I think this is why it needs to be negotiated truly and with attention to these details, which I hope the EU takes into account, and the Tunisian government itself. There is a need to do something that has an attention to how the market in Tunisia is, how the economy works, and there is this risk. I think that that means that negotiation need to be done in the correct way, but I think they will take into account this. I hope.
Well, of course. This is the nature of the reviewed version of the European food policy, to be like tailor-made the agreements.
Yeah, although what I think is that Tunisia deserves to have more, and they want more. They don't. I think there is. A broad set of relations, and the partnership if wants to be made the real success story, as you said. So partnership priorities still need to and the last Foreign Affairs Council conclusions on a very broad range of issues, although for sure that is not always possible, but for sure there are some issues that are more relevant, more where the EU is more capable to do things, but and in this sense I think it will be very important to see what happens with this donor conference, investment conference that has been organized in the end of November. There will be the Tunisian government has invited a wide range of international actors and companies, and wants to put in place a development plan for the next 5 years that also involves a significant amount of investment from donors and mainly foreign companies. We will see what they will be able to gather. The idea is to enhance the level of investment, and with this plan they want to reach a 4% growth per year, which of the because in the past few years it has been 1.5%, and they want to go back to more growth. And that relates also to the decentralization issue. The idea is also to distribute that for, let's say, the regions that are underdeveloped. It's a good endeavor. We'll see how it goes with this conference, but I think it's important, and I think it has also been referred to in the joint communication of the European Union.
Definitely, it's a good endeavor, and it will also help basically building trust between like the authorities and the potential business partners who would like to invest in Tunisia and improve the socio-economic condition in the country or specific region. So building trust through this international conference, good opportunity for the authorities in Tunisia.
Yes.
Apart from the bilateral framework between EU and Tunisia, Tunisia is also participating in how Tunisia and EU are cooperating in a multilateral framework with other countries in the MENA region.
Well, at the moment, well, there are several. There are, let's say, some issues. Mainly other international organizations, I would say.
Okay.
But what do you mean by multilateral track?
For example, there are issues related to Mediterranean in general. So
do you mean the Euro-Mediterranean?
Exactly.
Okay.
So what kind of cooperation? I mean, how they are as partners? I mean, is it easy for EU to work with Tunisia in a multilateral framework?
Okay.
So, at this moment, I would like you to tell me a few things about Tunisia's role in the multilateral sphere of cooperation with the EU and other partners in the region.
Yeah, well, I think as you may refer to the 5+5 Union for the Mediterranean and these sort of institutions where I think cooperation works quite well, and Tunisia has a positive role indeed. I think the problem remains the fact that the region, the Maghreb region mainly, is still not very much integrated. There are good relations with Algeria to a certain extent, but I think these kind of frameworks, multilateral frameworks with the EU and other European countries, and with to issues that are not, let's say, able to be very effective for the main challenges at the moment. So let's say it's important to work on water and employment of women and these kind of issues, and tracks where Tunisia has certainly a positive role, and that the EU always tries to work with, are still lacking some effectiveness from some of the main problems we are facing in the region. But indeed, they are important. I truly believe in the multilateralism as a very positive force. But I think that at Mediterranean level, it lacks some, and it's not like in the Eastern Partnership, where I think there is more.
Well, things are moving a little bit faster.
Yeah, but for sure they are important, and I think Tunisia definitely plays a positive role. Yes.
I would like to close our a really interesting discussion by phrasing a different kind of question. Since we are both from NGO, think tank, research community, and we are working with partners from the European neighborhood, whether it is south or east and so on, what we can do as civil society based in Brussels or in Europe in general, so as to work closer with Tunisian youth, in our case, in order to avoid phenomena of extremism and radicalism. So how we can approach these kind of groups, like women, as you mentioned before, young people, work closer with the civil society in Tunisia. What else we can do? How we can work better with them?
Well, you mean us or the European Union?
Us, since we are working with most of the time with EU-funded projects, so it's basically us with EU.
Well, I think that Tunisia has a very strong ground of civil society, functioning civil society, and I also recently met some people in Tunisia that work on these issues such as youth and radicalization, that are also within projects funded by the EU. There are some active NGOs, and I think there is the material to work more on this. It is indeed a very a very big endeavor, because it relates to very micro realities and not always very easy realities, especially, as I was saying before, in some of the regions that are not central. But for instance, one thing that I think is very important is to broaden the effort towards civil society, not only by giving them networks to work with, which is indeed very important, and but it is to work, like reframing a bit the scale of work that is done with them, so maybe on a smaller level but on very specific project, and to involve them more in the talks with the Tunisian government that is like, for example, on issues such as reform of justice or more technical issues. But I think it's very important to involve them more, because sometimes you have the conference of let's say the adults, and then on the side you have the moment with the civil society,
kind of workshop,
which is, I mean, it's very important, because of course there needs to be their presence, but if there is a way to enhance the dialogue in some way, to make them participate more, I think that will, like by broadening the basis of the debate, that would help much more, especially in a situation like Tunisia. I mean, we're not talking about Egypt, where of course you have a government that is, let's say, very autocratic at the moment, and there is not much space for society. Indeed, there it's difficult to work with this method, or let's say with this objective to involve, because there is a problem, and that wouldn't work. But in a society like Tunisia, where in a political system like the Tunisian one, there is really the space to do more about these kind of things, and I think the EU should be more proactive towards this.